The film was very interesting. I wouldn't say it was the most accurate film I've ever seen, but from our point of view, the inaccuracies made it quite interesting. You know, it was like reading a sort of souped-up version of your life, if you like. So, but I think it achieved its aim very well, actually.
It's not history. It's a film. You know, it's like expecting me to do the Battle of Agincourt and squeezing it all in 90 minutes. It's an entertainment. It's not real.
I never met the producers or the director. In fact, I never met him before the film was started. Although we were given a script, but I must admit I didn't read the script. It was very thick. But I'm happy with the film. I'm glad that it's not too serious and someone took a funny view of it.
In some ways...
Some of the ways, the things that did happen
were more real. Yeah, surreal.
More surreal.
We'd put in it. I mean, it was an interesting take, and also it's a compliment to be in a film while you're still alive, really, in rock and roll these days. So, no, I mean, I enjoyed it. I did enjoy it. It was very strange.
Music, for some reason, is very, very important to people growing up. And at school in Manchester, when I left school in the 70s, the only thing I was good at was creativity at school, was painting and art and creative things. Everything else I was terrible at. But there was no outlets for me to get a job in anything with those talents in Manchester. In fact, I was once told by a school teacher that I was wasting my time. He said, there's no call for those talents. He said, just forget about it. You're going to either work in a factory or work in an office, one of those two things. He said, that's all you're going to be able to do. Which was a terrible thing to say. I was only like 11 years old at the time, but I'll always remember it. Anyway, I proved him wrong, didn't I? So, fuck him.
How does it feel to treat me like you do when you've laid your hands upon me, told me who you are? I thought I was mistaken.
I mean, its importance musically is amazing because, I mean, I can't think of anywhere else in the world that has given so many groups, you know, in my genre. I just can't understand it. I can't believe it even now, you know, with bands.
And continues to do so.
Yeah, Elbow, I Am Clute. You know, you're getting so many groups coming through from the Dubs right the way through. It just keeps on going. I'm glad that we've, you know, kicked out Liverpool. Liverpool. Manchester, yeah.
Without New Order, there wouldn't have been Happy Mondays. Without New Order, there wouldn't be Chemical Brothers, and there wouldn't be half the other bands, because, like you said, they were the ones who made dance music credible by using remixers like Shep Pettibone, working with people like me and John Roby, and you know, they were hungry. They wanted to, you know, they wanted to do something different, and they went to the source. And yeah, and I think that's what actually blew up dance music over here. Them pretty much. The fact is, he worked on instinct. That's my point. He knew that the songs were shit, but he knew that there was something there, you know, to develop, and that they'd be important. U2 got so much of their sound from early New Order and late Joy Division. I mean, you listen to some of the tracks and you just go, you know, Bono and Edge, who are friends of mine, who I love their music, and you know. But it's obvious where they got the stuff from, you know. And so I think they've been really influential to other bands. They've made they've actually made great singles. They're a singles band, you know. They really are. They make great singles, and the albums have been great also. But you know when you go see them live, it's almost like greatest hits. And you know, just Billy Corgan said that, you know, they were his Beatles. You know, that they really have those, to him, the songs mean as much as the Beatles might mean to me, but Beatles don't mean that much to me, but you know, my generation. The Hacienda was a northern dance club. I mean, northern people, the way northerners are, you know, friendly and sort of down to earth and just sort of, you know, up for a good time, basically, with people like Mike Pickering, you know, playing great house music. So yeah, it was. I mean, you know, the garage was darker. You know, it was just a different vibe when in the beginning, and then the Hacienda got a bit dark too. Just, you know, with all the problems they had.
My favourite line in the movie is where Coogan says, "I run Factory Records." I think. And it's like absolutely, who the hell knows? No one has the foggiest idea. The rationale, I think the rationale was inside Erasmus's head somewhere. He never told us what it was, but it was inside Erasmus's head, I think. Or was there a rationale? That is praxis, that it's in doing it you find out. So, you know, for Rob's phrase, we just put some records out with my mates, you do it. You do what you want to do, you know, and let's do this. And in doing it, you find out why you did it. And, you know, we did it because we bloody loved music, and it made a statement about the fact that you don't have to behave and do this and do that. And for a while, you don't have to promote, and in other ways, you don't have to go this. So, but you discover that just by doing it. You do what you want to do. And if there's another rationale for us is willfulness. I think it's the one word that summed all of us up, and most of our musicians, everybody else. It's just being bloody willful. And willfulness is not a crime, I don't think. I can remember in the Hacienda cocktail bar one night when there was a bunch of high-energy fans from Preston who kept coming to the cocktail bar every Friday night, this is pre-house, playing fucking high energy. I was like, oh. So one night I put Mozart on, forced the bartender to put Mozart on. So they all started moaning, whinging, so I'm going, you know, and they go, you know, well, we want it and we're the customers. And I said to them, listen, love, Sid Vicious was once asked whether when he made his music, he thought about the man in the street, and Sid answered, no, I've met the man in the street, he's a cunt. And that particular phrase is perhaps central to our philosophy. To be the guy who signed the check that paid for the labels on Atmosphere by Joy Division is actually such a privilege, and I kind of remain in awe of that sense of privilege. And you know, and I can be all flash and bullshitty and the twat that is the popular image or whatever, but deep down inside it's like, if that's the price you pay for being connected to this wonderful stuff, you know. And I think that's why Factory, this whole thing about the style and the design and the packaging and the rest of it, I just think it was like, can I use the word sacerdotal? Is that a correct word? The whole idea of actually putting out, of actually creating a piece of music with some genius musicians, and then this being bought in a shop by somebody, seemed to us, all of us, to be somehow a sacred thing. And it was like, well, this is such, you know, what a privilege to be doing this, so we'll do it as well as we can. The writer, whose name I don't remember, which is remiss of me, said, while we marvel at the drugs and the craziness and the ecstatic atmosphere of the night, let us not forget the rhythm section. Paul Ryder and Gary Whelan of the Happy Mondays single-handedly, and with Shaun's guidance and Shaun's direction, single-handedly adapted the brilliant, innovative house rhythms of Chicago and Detroit from the mid-'80s to British post-punk, Indian punk, and created a new music. And they did it. And they were wonderful because, you know, I mean, as the film says, it was probably a very bad idea. You know, hello, he takes drugs, hello, they take drugs. Well now, what shall we do now? But it was great, it was fantastic. I mean, the real achievement, I mean, I am an elitist, I love my own bands, I hate everybody else, I loathe all of the bands, they're all shite. And I'm particularly proud of being associated with an operation that had two bands who produced two classic albums in different styles, back to back.
I was at the Art College in Manchester between 74 and 78. During that period, punk happened. And I was studying graphic design with my best friend, who'd been at school with me, Malcolm Garrett. And we were both just really keen to get involved in what was happening, and punk was the single biggest cultural event in what was my short lifetime at the age of 20. I was 21 in '76, and I remember at the time feeling quite distinctly that this is perhaps what rock and roll had been like in the 50s. By the mid-70s, as a young person in the UK, you felt that you had become a rather passive recipient of popular culture. You were a punter. You'd go and see a band in an auditorium with 2,000 or 3,000 other people. It was all one step removed, well, more than one step removed from your own kind of everyday existence. And when punk happened, it suddenly localized the experience. Suddenly you were in a bar or a small, kind of basement venue somewhere with maybe 200 people rather than 2,000, and whoever was performing was 20 feet away rather than 200 yards away, and this was really quite fresh experience, and there was this remarkable sense of involvement, and also a kind of freeze frame moment where the establishment, the kind of pop cultural establishment, were kind of caught unawares. It's kind of like time stood still for a moment, and the kind of grown-ups didn't get it, and the younger people did, and there was this kind of moment of opportunity to kind of step through. You had the sense that you could step through the doorway and do something. So there were kids, and if they wanted to be in a band, they picked up a guitar, and the next night they were in a band. They didn't have to do very much. They just had to have the will to be there. And Malcolm and I felt very much the same. We wanted to work with bands. We'd kind of dreamt of doing record covers since we'd been at school together, and suddenly we knew people who were making records. The person you were having a drink with at the bar last night was on stage tonight and possibly going to be having a record deal or cutting a record next week, and you felt that you could be involved. So this was kind of quite a remarkable moment. The attitude was that I mean, in a very in the true spirit of punk, everybody was doing something that they wanted to do. We were doing something that we believed in. The profitability issue didn't come into it. Nobody was involved in what we were doing for the purposes of making money. Everybody was doing what they did because they wanted to do it, and there was an opportunity to do it. Tony organised a Friday night at the Russell Club because he cared to organise it, because there was nowhere else at that point in time where bands could play in Manchester. So he cared to do it. I did a poster for it because I cared that there was a good poster. Bands played because they wanted to play. We released a record because there was some money available and we wanted to do it. The idea of actually getting the money back was quite unexpected, and the idea of there being any profit was totally unexpected. This was the spirit of everybody who contributed to Factory, and it was the spirit of the groups. I mean, Joy Division made a record because they wanted to make a record, not because they wanted to sell records. The Factory experience was never a business, which was, of course, its quintessential appeal, and perhaps, well, not perhaps at all, almost certainly why it's respected and remembered with such reverence. On one or two occasions, he's appalled me with his kind of lack of conscience. But we've kind of always managed to get over a difference and stay friends. And I am still friends with Tony, and if he's in town and he calls and says, let's go and eat or something like that, I always look forward to it. I think most people saw him as, you know, a kind of lone figure from the grown-up world who was, in a way, crusading the cause. So even though he was a slightly different generation and coming from a slightly different place, everybody respected his kind of involvement, his support. He was supportive of it, and whether we liked him or not, we respected the fact that he was very supportive, and also everybody just felt like they knew him.
We formed it in about 1981, and I was about 18, 19, because it was cliche, but nothing else to do.
Right.
I mean, most of the other members were still at school. The drummer and the keyboard player were still at school. I got some of the lyrics off David Essex's film, Stardust. Mixed them in. Just a mishmash of film and whatever was going on in my head. We made it look like anyone could do what we was doing. You know, we made it look really, really easy. Which at the time it was. Well, basically we turned Arsing About into an art form. Like I said, people saw what we did and they thought they could do it. What was we bad at? God, everything. Timekeeping. Everything a band's supposed to be good at, we was bad at. We was good at just being ourselves, which was just fucking about. Oh, God. Who was in charge in Factory? Tony is a great guy. I mean, he started us off. I won't knock him. I fell out with him a little bit when we finished the last album, but I made up with him since then. Factory never signed bands. That was the thing. Factory, all the bands on Factory just made records. No one signed. We was the first band to sign to Factory. When in around 1987. But before that, no other band had signed. It was only when the sort of big explosion took off.
Right.
If there was a big explosion, that they started signing bands. I mean, we liked all the bands on Factory. You know, the whole idea of being on Factory was just being cool. First gigs, oh God, we played basically all the gigs we ever played. At first, there was nobody there. There was just Enemy and Sounds journalists, like venues that held about 200 people with 4 journalists in. Really, it was just all about getting written about in the magazines. Well, yeah, we had our own party on stage. We didn't give a fuck really about the audience. I mean, we really never did for quite a while. It was just to entertain us on the stage. It's only when we got more serious that we had to start giving a fuck about the audience. Basically, just the E. You know, it was just, everyone wanted to party, no one wanted to go home at 2 o'clock. And it was great. It was a nutcase. He was. We were supposed to be a mad party band, but Martin was madder than us lot. Producing the album while he was asleep was pretty good. He could produce while he was asleep. And just basically sort of like managed to press buttons while he was just snoring. I thought the idea of a film about Thatcher was that they'd never get it right. They just wouldn't get the film right. And it's too soon to make a film about Thatcher. Yeah, there's a story worth telling in there. I mean, it'd be interesting to see. I hope this film's okay. I don't want anything to do with it myself, but, you know, I hope it's okay.
Well, nothing can compare with the Mondays, you know what I mean? Because it was like a one-off experience, you know what I mean? First time round, you hadn't got a clue where you was going, what to expect, you know what I mean? So you could never repeat that experience, you know what I mean? No. It's unrepeatable. It's a brilliant lyric writer. I'm always surprised because I never really play the Mondays, but when I do hear Monday's tune, when I'm out, I'm always slightly surprised, you know what I mean, about how good it did sound. Mm. Oh, it's bad at everything, really. Yeah. It was never exceptional, that's one thing. I think that's how we was good, because we was really bad at doing it good. Yeah, or the other way around, really good at doing it bad or something like that. Well, Tony was the main man. Right. Undoubtedly, Tony, he made all the decisions. He was like the flamboyant leader, you know what I mean? We were just all Joy Division fans, and was into what's them Scousers called now? Yeah, was into all that style of music as we were growing up, you know what I mean? So we was well aware of Thatcher. And the Mondays, we only wanted to join Factory Records. We didn't really want to join, and we didn't want to sign for another label. But the one we put all our efforts into getting ourselves on Factory. We kind of what's it called when you start? We start Factory Records. That's what we've done. We stalked anyone to do with Factory Records. We even got into the Elf Club and found Ucky's address, because one of the lads works as a postman, Paul, and got his address, and we turned up at his door with a tape. So, yes, Factory Records got well stalked. Yeah, it was like I say, I don't know how it happened. It was a press thing, really, because luckily the press got onto it as well, because it was all at the time like Lloyd Cole and all, winkle picking, wearing boots and going, you know, and that type of thing. So I think it was hungry for something else, and we was just in the right time at the right place to give it. And I like all the bands that have been on there. Yeah, I think it's a. Have you got that box set, that Palatine Road box set? Yeah, like the history of Factory Records. It's like fucking absolutely brilliant piece of music to own, you know what I mean? Yeah, well, they used to learn Joy Division songs. They used to cover all sorts of bands when they first started learning the instruments. They started like everyone else playing other people's songs and started developing into their own style, really. Yeah. But they used to play everybody else's songs really badly. I suppose ecstasy played a big part, I reckon, in our explosion. Yeah. Because suddenly we started making sense to everybody.
Shaun, Ryder and Ian Brown were just such perfect pop stars, because they were talented and grumpy and messianic and monosyllabic. They were all these things at once. And they kind of treated you mean to keep you keen. I mean, the sort of academic reason for it coming together, I suppose, was the fact that before Manchester, you know, the alternative music scene was fractured. It was like the British class system. So the middle classes liked the twee, guitar indie, C86 stuff, or the Wonder stuff and bands like that. and the working classes were into, you know, the Chicago dance stuff like Frankie Knuckles and people like that. And Manchester somehow brought those two warring factions together. And I think, so that's the academic reason for the success of Manchester, that suddenly two audiences combined to make one audience which was big enough to, significant enough to make the cover of Newsweek and, you know, play at stadiums, play at Spike Island and GMX. And that had never happened before. The idea of an indie band playing an island, it just never happened before. Just something happened suddenly, and then the third time I saw them play at GMX, it was just amazing. It just all, as it says in the movie, it really did just all come together suddenly. And songs like Lazy-itis can still put a shiver through you, I think. Yeah, so I think the Happy Mondays were the ones I personally liked the most. I always loved to hate Tony Wilson, but actually Tony Wilson always just hated me. I remember I was a guest on one of his programmes on Granada Reports, and I was making like a little mini name for it. I was like a mini Tony Wilson, and Tony Wilson had me on his programme, and I was like 23 and living in Gorton, and I was overcompensating by trying to be funny, and I was just dying, you know, on live TV. And afterwards, I was later told Tony Wilson ran around backstage going, "I got Ronson, I got Ronson," and I was just confused. I wasn't worthy of being got. So that was always a mystery to me. Did he feel kind of threatened by somebody as insignificant as I was? But now, you see, Steve Coogan plays Tony Wilson so adorably, you know. I mean, it's the most surprising thing in the world to have Tony Wilson portrayed as a kind of a heartbreakingly adorable person. But Steve Coogan manages it. And actually now I really like Tony Wilson, because now I see him as being portrayed by Steve Coogan. I never liked Tony Wilson, but I liked not liking him. I mean, nobody liked Tony Wilson, right? I don't think. I remember Manchester being really grim and nothing there. And, you know, you could only buy tins of tuna. And, I mean, I don't want to sound like the guy, you know, we used to live in a hole in the ground. But that's how I remember Manchester. I was living in Gorton, next door to Rennie from the Stone Roses, in fact. And I'd meet him on the street once in a while and we'd say, "Isn't Gorton disgusting? And there's nothing for the children to do." And then I moved just down the road to Dickinson Road, coincidentally right in next door to Manny from the Stone Roses. So I went, and that was marginally nicer. But no, it was grim. There was the International 2, and there was the Apollo, and chip shops. It was just chip shops. There was no fancy sandwiches, no slow roasted tomatoes in Manchester at that point. Now you can't move for them.
I don't think it would have happened the same way without Tony, you know. I mean, I think that he dominated it, and his personality dominated it, and everybody knew him as the public face of fact because he was on the telly and he was reading the news and everything around here. And you know, he had his Granada programmes where he got the Pistols on and Elvis Costello, and I remember seeing Elvis Costello, you know, on the regional opt-out news, Granada Reports, whatever, doing Alison on his own. You thought, well, bloody hell, you know, that's marvellous. And I think, you know, Tony is a kind of just one of those figureheads I think you need for a great label, really. You know, I mean, and that he, you know, viewed it all as some kind of art house prank, really. You know, claims to come from this situationist kind of background and approach to it all. You know, and a lot of people dismissed him, you know, as a pretentious wanker. I remember going down there and seeing Simple Minds and U2 in at the same time. I remember seeing Jim Kerr in there and all that. But I mean, no, you used to see the people who were there were like, you know, you'd see obviously the New Order guys from time to time. Certain Ratio people, they were hanging around a lot, you know. Seems to remember Jez and Donald Johnson, who was a fantastic drummer with the Ratios. They were knocking around. Vinnie Riley was probably there, but you wouldn't have been able to see him. He'd been hiding under a chair. You know, so there were people like that about. I think, you know, I don't know, it all blurs into one a bit, really, you know. Hacienda, I mean, I think, and
that I was member number 15 of the Hacienda. I could be wrong, but it was pretty early on because Tony gave, it was like me and Stuart, who were obviously playing their records, and they gave us these little cards. I think they were grey. They certainly had the black and yellow edging on, you know, that kind of industrial sheet which became very cliched. And again, you know, they were one of the first to adopt that, really. And it's still a style you see all over the place. And so we were, you know, aware of it opening. And when we first went down, we thought it was bloody awful because it was this big cold space and people weren't really going. People were only going at the beginning to see if there was a good band on. So like New Order played and the opening night, you know. And it became apparent it was a terrible place to see a band because the acoustics were diabolical. It was just, you know, a big echoing metallic box. There was a DJ booth and a low stage, and so you could see from the dance floor. But then the dance floor, you know, if you were in the other 2/3, you couldn't see at all. You could go upstairs. There was a balcony, a kind of metallic gantry, but it was only about 2 or 3 deep. So again, you couldn't really see. You couldn't see well, you could hear, but it sounded terrible. You know, Martin Hannett made these things where the drums and the bass were really locked right in front of your eyes. And then the guitars and the vocals and everything kind of faded in and peeped from behind these great blocks of rhythm, which I think influenced the way a lot of records were made, you know. I know certainly Bono and U2 were really kind of, you know, even though you'd think U2 don't sound much like George, but in the early days they you know, were really influenced by Martin, and I know that to be true. Because Bono told me that when he came to Manchester, because, you know, when U2 were just starting on Island Records and I had the indie show, and so they used to come on my show quite regularly. But my favourite story about Martin Hannett is he was producing a record for a band, a little-known Manchester band, the Freshies, Chris Saville, who became Frank Sidebottom, the comedian Frank Sidebottom. And they had a minor hit with I'm in Love with the Girl on the Virgin Megastore checkout desk. And Martin didn't produce that one, but he produced a record for them. And Martin turned up to do the record, and they're in the studio. And they started playing it, and it came time to mix it. And Martin said, right, I'm off now. And he said, well, you've not mixed the record. And he said, well, got to go. And you know, he said, well, you're supposed to be mixing the record. He said, well, I'll tell you what. He said, just put all the faders in a straight line, on just medium, halfway up like that, and run it through. So he said, all right then, you know. So Martin Hannett went and he set all the faders like that, ran it through to the masters. And do you know what? It sounded absolutely shite.
I don't have a bad word to say about Tony Wilson. I think he's got a lot of balls, and a lot of the time he'll let his mouth go first. But you need people like that. You need people to put their neck on the line. And Tony did that, and did that for Factory. One of the things we hated about Factory was how cool the image was. So we were like, nope, not gonna let anyone do our sleeve, we're gonna do it. And then I think the night before the deadline, we kind of rung up each other in a panic because we hadn't got a sleeve together, and Jimmy did it with felt tips and scrawled Jim 1, couldn't even fit all the writing in felt tips, and they had to put out this sleeve that was like, looked like it had been done by an autistic child, you know, and they prided themselves, and every sleeve had been so cool. And I hear Tony ranted at us for that one for a long time. He was well pissed with us for that. We toured a New Order, and we took the Monday, as I say, we took the Mondays on tour and gave them their first kind of big, you know, we went to see them. Remember Nathan, their manager, said, oh, you know, Tim, come and see, he was pretty friendly with us, me and Martine, said, come and see this great band I'm managing, great band. And he took us to Wigan to see him in a little club. And Shaun was so out of it that I think he came off after 20 minutes thinking he'd been on for hours. And so they played literally about 4 songs and came off. And the rest of the band were like, Shaun, and he was like, we've been on for hours, man, we've been on for hours. He was obviously like off his head. But they were brilliant for 20 minutes, and we were like, yeah, fine, take you on tour, great.
To Tony?
A maverick.
Yeah, I mean, big personality.
Manchester maverick.
You know, did a lot for us. Can be a pain in the arse. I mean, I'd hate to work with the bloke full time. I mean, it was Travis around the bleeding bend. I mean, so over the top. I mean, completely over the top. But a heart of gold. And loved James and said some great, fantastic things in the press. I mean, he compared us to the 1974, I think it was 1974 Dutch football team, and they had this kind of natural kind of grace to the way they played football, and he compared us musically to them. So it was the nicest thing that anyone's ever said to us.
Yeah, an unforced natural grace.
Yeah. We were just such pains in the arse. And then we wanted to design the sleeve. Don't like your sleeves, look all this cool stuff, we're going to design it. So we did this, I did this horrible kind of felt-tipped cover, you know, we took it in and Tony was kind of going, oh, you want something like this? We go, no, we want that. And it's like, and he was interviewed for the James book, Tony Wilson was, and his interpretation of the chain of events was that they thought it was a great idea, but at the time they didn't. He's lying, they didn't, they hated it. They were so nice, and they really were. I mean, we should have stayed with Factory. That's one thing we've all regretted, that we didn't do an album with them. And we just thought, we bumped into problems with them, to be honest with you, which I think were justified. They didn't promote anything because they didn't need to initially, because there's all the cool image that went with it that kind of sold itself on Factory. You know, loads of people would just go out and buy all the new releases regardless. And that kind of shifted, that emphasis moved slightly. And we suffered. We were in the kind of point where we were stuck in this no man's land where our records weren't getting in the stores, but they weren't promoting them. They were still going, no, we don't do adverts, don't do blah, blah, blah. So we were just like, yeah, but, come on.
They thought if a record was good, that it would sell itself. And their argument for that was New Order. The New Order records, they didn't have to take out massive advertising campaigns or do loads of promotion. It just had its own natural momentum. Which was fine if you'd come from Joy Division, and the lead singer had died and you'd got built up this entire cult. But for a new band who nobody ever heard of, to break them, they didn't see that they had to undertake any kind of commitment to advertising. And we used to argue with them about that, and their distribution wasn't very good at the time. So that was why we started to have these reservations. Their ethos and their idea was a little too generous and a little short-sighted, I think. That they didn't get business savvy until it was too late. That, as in their idea of if the music is good enough, it will sell itself. If the idea is true enough and substantial, if it's substantial and it's true, it will work. And it'll work almost, without any looking after, without any guidance, because it's a good idea and it's fair. It's not what everybody else is doing. It's different, it's unique, so it'll have its own momentum. And I think they found out, too late, as they were sinking, as they owed more and more money. I mean, the biggest debtor really was New Order. Because that's where the twist came, was that New Order were the most successful band, therefore they owed New Order money, whereas all the other bands never actually reached that point of breaking even, so that they owed them money. And they didn't have the cash to pay their debt to New Order. So New Order became bigger and bigger owners of the Hacienda. They got bigger and bigger shares, so they should have seen it then, but I don't think they did. And they didn't, they couldn't, by the end, they couldn't turn it round.
Why Manchester? Why is Manchester special in that respect? I mean, probably no other city in the world. Could you give a list of bands from it? I don't know why that is. I think it's easy to look at second cities, and go, you have the capital and then you have the second city, and this is kind of where everybody's trying a little bit harder and pushing a bit and left to their own devices as well to some degree. And I think that's probably why things happened like they did in the 80s, was that the Manchester was left to, the bands were left to kind of find the sound and to develop. The A&M were just too lazy to come here. So bands arrived on the scene that had played a lot, that got a lot of songs, and they were good. And the spotlight was shone on them all at the same time, and it was called a scene. Even though the bands at that point hadn't just arrived at the same time, they'd been playing around for years.
We didn't go there that much, did we, really?
No.
We weren't the 24-hour party people.
No, we hit that monastic streak by then, hadn't we, really?
Yeah.
God, it was hilarious.
Well, they supported us. That was.
Oh, it was hilarious.
It was.
It was just.
They missed the first gig.
It was cartoon, yeah. Well, I think we played.
I know we played the
Ritz.
first gig. They missed the second.
Yeah, we played the Ritz in Manchester the first night, and they were there all right. And then the next morning they couldn't find Shaun, and we were supposed to be playing. Well, we were playing Newcastle, and they were supposed to be supporting us, and they couldn't find Shaun, and they had to drive around like about 3 hours till eventually they found him. And they dragged him in the van and sped off. And of course they were late for the gig now. And they crashed the van on the way to the gig. Turns up at Newcastle, starts unloading the gear out of the van, and some bloke says, "What are you doing?" Said, "Oh, it was Happy Wonders supporting James because this is Simply Red gig. They're at the wrong venue." But this fellow came back in the van, turns up at our gig. They've missed their slot. We're just about to go on stage at this point, and they're like, they pile out the van and the backstage, effing and jeffing and blaming each other for it, this, that, and the other. And it's just like, we're like, oh God, what have we done? What have we done?
Yeah. They were a complete and utter shambles, weren't they?
They were.
But they were so apologetic.
They were lovely. They really were lovely. And they were cartoons. It was just, what's happened today, and with the Bundies, is everybody here? Just about, I think, yeah. Oh, it was funny.
Yeah. It's like having your own sort of, your daily copy of Viz.
Yeah, it was.
You just didn't know.
They lost the tour support, didn't they? Or lost the tour support.
Lost. Yeah. Yeah, one night we came on stage and got backstage, went in the dressing room. No beer.
Everything had gone.
Everything had gone. All our clothes were there and all our money and everything, but the entire Ryder, all the food.
We knew they'd got a party in Manchester, didn't we? And we're like, I wonder who's done this then? And there was security on the door, and they must have got in through the window or something. There's some blocks to outside the door, no idea what was going on.
They completely cleaned us out, and the next day they were like really sweet and apologetic.
I think it was bad.
No, they got this banging party, so they left. As soon as they got off stage, they left, nicked all our beer and started off back to Manchester for the party.
But they were great as well. I mean, as a band, they were brilliant. I mean, we used to go out there every night watching them, and they were wonderful.
No, I mean, I like Tony. I've always liked him. And people still find it amazing that we actually like him now. After all the money he cost us and the mistakes he made. But I think we were all party to it, really. So, I mean, it was funny because I always remember when I was a kid in Salford, my mum used to take me to a little shop where she used to buy cigarettes from on Regent Road, just where it crossed Ecclesney Road. And it was Tony's dad's shop. His dad was a tobacconist. And I always remember he always used to dress so well, and he always had dicky bows on and everything. And Mum would go in and he'd go, "Oh, hello, Mrs. Hook, how are you?" He'd go, "Oh, Mr. Wilson, I'm fine, could I have..." And she'd always buy a 20 senior service or something. I'd be like, oh. That was Tony's dad. It's so weird. Yeah. But I mean, Tony, he's all right. I like him. He's funny. I mean, you can't take him seriously. But he's, I mean, really, if I had to be truthful about it, without him we wouldn't be here now, I don't think. Certainly not in the guise that we are. He gave everything up to put Unknown Pleasures out. When Factory was set up, Tony Wilson was the ideas man. Pete Saville they brought in because he could do the graphics, because he was doing a graphics course. John Briley owned Cargo Studio, so he could give him free studio time. Martin Hannett was the producer. And Arne Erasmus was the enforcer who used to... he was the bully boy, making everybody making the groups do that. You be there, you do this, you do that. He was that type of guy, the nuts and bolts man. So Tony very cleverly put the whole thing in place. John Briley was the first to go. I think he was the only one that ever had any sense of this whole fucking thing. He got out quick while the going was good. God bless him. And the rest of us have just stuck around until it all fizzled out, I suppose. What I mean, my favourite track would be Atmosphere, I suppose, for Joy Division. But I mean, I don't know. It's funny, I listened to 24 Hour Party People, and Digital sounded amazing. I mean, I think Joy Division were a fantastic group. For the amount of time they were together, and they never did one duff song. Not one. It was incredible. And, the amazing thing is that we still get as much publishing to this day from Joy Division's 2 albums as we do off New Order's 8. Which, apart from the compilations, but it's quite strange. Great group. Even every time I listen to them, I think, fucking hell, wow. Glad to be part of it. Nah, we were very punky. Very, very punky indeed. The songs were just punk songs, a bit crap, really. But, it was just a way of learning your way through. But, we played well together. It was the same lineup as Joy Division, so we always played well. Joy Division were always very tight. Tight enough that you never even noticed. You didn't even have to say, hey, your playing's a bit shitty there, mate, or anything like that. It was just always great. They always played well. And, no, they were good. We used to have a fight all the time, You play to know people. Played to know people in Oldham Tower Club once. That was an interesting night. I played to one person in Halifax Good Mood Club. And that's what it's like, you just drive around in a transit. I don't know. It does. Even though the times I've tried to get rid of them. And I'm sure they've tried to get rid of me as well. We never actually succeeded, and we always ended up coming back, which was, much to Rob Gretton's relief. But now I don't know why it works. I don't know. I play differently with Bernard than I play with anybody else, and I think he does with me. And I don't know why. Maybe it's because we've known each other for so long. I don't know. It's not conscious, because we don't ever talk about music. We never, still to this day, don't talk about it, we just do it.
I arrived in Manchester in 1980, and I had no mates whatsoever for the first few years, except I just went to a lot of gigs and bought a lot of records, and started a fanzine in 1983 called Debris, and that was my way into the culture, really, and I kind of met bands and labels and became part of the community. I think the only time that I ever got a free New Order record was not when I was DJing at the Hacienda and not when I was writing for The Face, but when I was doing a fanzine. And that was the first, I think I got a copy of Brotherhood. One thing about the mid-80s was that there was that amateurish feel about things. The world wasn't cutthroat, and you could make your mark in quite an informal way. And if you had passion for it, and if you just hung out enough, you could make a contribution. It wasn't about how much money you had behind you, or what contacts you had, or anything like that. It was much more a case of everyone pitching in, and the Manchester music scene, particularly, I think, was very cooperative. A lot you would find in the mid-80s, a lot of bands sharing rehearsal space. You'd find bands going on tour and taking other bands as a support act, and you'd find people like me putting on little gigs and bands quite happy to play for you. And there was a really good sense of unity, in a sense that everyone was going in the same direction and working for the same aim, which was basically to try and get some acknowledgement for what was happening in Manchester. Like the Stone Roses and Happy Mondays and James and the Inspiral Carpets and bands like that, they'd all been around for 4 or 5 years. It wasn't an overnight thing, it wasn't hype. But because they were in Manchester, they were just that little bit away from the all-seeing eye of the media, and were just able to do their own thing and to, in a way, perfect their art before it went out into the marketplace. Which was why when in the late 80s, suddenly all the media wanted to know about Manchester, there suddenly seemed to be all these great fully formed bands. And the fact is that they'd been forming themselves and working their songs out and finding their own way for 4 or 5 years. One of the key things about Manchester was that if you look back on it, it's quite complicated. On the one hand, you've got all these different bands like the Mondays and the Roses, who are basically indie bands with a bit of a sense of rhythm. And then on the other hand, you've got all these ravers, and you've got the beginning of rave culture. And there was a certain amount of crossover, but there was also a certain amount of tension. But the thing about Manchester was it had a label. And if things have got a label, you can sell it. And Manchester also had the Hacienda, which was a focus for it all. So although I think in other cities you get good activity and you get good bands and you get good clubs, the thing about Manchester was that you actually had the label and you had the club. So almost 4 times a week, we played out at the Hacienda what Manchester was all about. So if you had some cynical person saying, oh, Manchester means nothing, you could just invite them down to the Hacienda on a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday or Saturday. And the whole thing is enacted and it's demonstrated and you can't deny it. There weren't clubs that had that aura and created that excitement like the Hacienda. And there wasn't a label that had the very clear identity that Factory had. So there was a whole lot of activity which wasn't to do with Factory, but everything was kind of in the way, in Factory's shadow. Well, Factory, I think, was not a great business. It wasn't run like a great business. I don't think it ever was, really. I mean, someone who I know who worked in the accounts department said it was just a mess, it was chaos, that it was a question of stumbling from one Wilson whim to the next, that there wasn't any business plan. Factory, but that was endearing, do you know what I mean? I mean, if it had been very business orientated, they would have made different decisions. There wouldn't have been the creativity, there probably wouldn't have been the crackle of innovation, and it wouldn't have been as pleasant to work with, it wouldn't have been as endearing. It probably would have survived. I mean, if they'd been better businessmen, Factory would still be around now and the Hacienda would still be open. Other things, you know, that in the very pop market that are very successful commercially, that would never have credibility. You know, however many times Jerry Halliwell has a makeover, she will never be credible. And yet, however many times Tony Wilson makes mistakes, and he makes loads of them, he always will be.